You're listening to WCOM LP 103.5 FM Carborough and Chapel Hill. It's a Tuesday, it's 5 o'clock, and that only means one thing. It's time for another round of Snarky Faith with your host, Stuart Deloney. This is a space where we irreverently wrestle through life, culture, and spirituality, all with our heads in the clouds, our tongues in our cheeks, our hearts in our sleeves, and our feet on the ground. At Snarky Faith, the questions or even the answers are never the point. It's all about the conversation. So here's your host, Stuart Deloney.
Well, good afternoon and welcome to another round of Snarky Faith Radio. I'm your host, Stuart Deloney, and joining me as always is my trusty co-host, Ben Triplett. Ben, what do you think about Pokemon Go? Go.
It scares me a little. This is a point at which I can be a little pretentious because I was doing it back when it came out, when it was like super uncool, and I got made fun of a lot in high school because I was a 17-year-old playing a game where you collect little like animals, and everyone thought it was ridiculous. And back then it was like a game that 9-year-olds played, and this is before Pokemon cards even. I know that kind of I think it became even more of a kid's thing when the Pokemon cards came out.
So you're saying back in the Game Boy days?
Yes.
Educate me.
The brick Game Boy. Maybe not the brick. I think it was probably the smaller one right after that, the Game Boy Color. But yeah, so I bought it back then because it was a huge Japanese thing, and I was really into like anime and stuff, so anything Japanese fascinated me in later high school. And just like 3 of us in our high school played Pokemon. And if anyone caught wind of it, you immediately got made fun of. You were supposed to be like a 9-year-old girl or something if you were playing Pokemon. And so we caught a lot of flack, but I mean, it was addictive and it was very fun. It kind of captured the Japanese, I think, fascination with collecting things.
Okay.
I don't know if that's a thing, but I've kind of caught on that a lot of, at least recently maybe, there's just kind of a collecting fad in Japanese culture. You have lots of like quarter machines and things like that. So I think it kind of tapped into that. And now it's funny to see, I mean, when I'm at the hospital, people, I have like peers talking about it every day. And it's just surreal to me that, quote unquote cool people, or like, I guess normal people or whatever, are talking about Pokemon when, 15 years ago it was, you would just get lambasted if you talked about Pokemon.
Yeah, it is. This is like definitely like a 90s flashback that's happening right now. And no, I do find it fascinating. I was reading an article, they were even saying the amount of time people are spending on Pokemon Go is almost like double that of the time they're spending on Facebook or Twitter, not all combined, but like if you're looking at them individually, how much time people are spending a day on each of those. And Pokemon Go is,
Yeah, it's like a huge overnight thing. I mean, I'm actually a little surprised. There are moments where you just kind of step back and wonder what happened with technology. And this is one of those moments. I don't know how this happened so quickly, this like augmented reality thing, but it's like, to me, it feels like overnight augmented reality is a thing now. Like, it's like smartphones, like touch screens. I know touchscreens were kind of a thing for a little while, and they existed, but nobody thought it was cool. It was very clunky, and just like out of nowhere, smartphones burst onto the scene, and now you can't go anywhere without seeing some sort of touchscreen thing. So I'm wondering if, a year down the road, augmented reality is just going to be like a thing we accept as part of our world.
Well, it's funny that you mentioned the touchscreen thing, because I was working at home the other day, and my youngest daughter came up and wanted to show me something on the computer, and she just starts touching like the screen of my laptop.
I've seen people do that before.
Yeah, and it just hadn't dawned in her head because she's so used to using touchscreen stuff, and I'm like, "What are you doing?
Right. This is broken."
Yeah, because I'm like, "Please more," because I love smudges all over my laptop screen. That's awesome.
Yeah.
But no. So roping Pokemon Go and this kind of phenomena that's going into this, it wasn't going to be long before we had Christians that were out kind of lambasting it. or lambasting it. Maybe that's a better.
Or
way of saying it.
lambasting, which is probably like the next level of lambasting.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's been happening because what's interesting is, I mean, you end up seeing this because a lot of the Pokemon, I guess their gyms are in churches, and so there's been this fascination with churches and municipality buildings. But with this, it's really interesting. So this comes from an article, and we won't dwell on this too long, but I just think it's too funny to leave. It's an article by Hillary Hansen called "This Pastor Has Convinced Us That Pokemon is Actually Cyber Demons." And there is Pastor Rick Wiles, who describes himself as like a conservative Orthodox Christian, because he's the one that's getting it right. When people say they're conservative Orthodox, they're like, we've got it perfected. The rest of y'all are just all messed up.
I've got my feet on the ground.
Yes, and so on his
sarcasm.
That was coming in hot. No, and so what he has a show called True News, which that whole idea of truth and everything else. But of course, he's conservative Orthodox, so he does possess the truth like no one else. And so he suspects that there's something sinister that is happening with this Pokemon Go thing. And his whole idea, and this is what he says, is, quote, the enemy Satan is targeting churches with virtual digital cyber demons.
Ooh.
I know, and he believes that this thing is a magnet for demonic powers.
Okay, Rick Wiles, Pokemon's been around for 15, maybe more years now.
Yeah, but now it's magnetized with evil.
I get now it's on my smartphone, so it scares me.
Yes.
And I mean, things like Pokemon have been around for a lot longer than that. Where you been, Rick Wiles?
I don't know, but I love how, and we talked about this a little bit, and I think we've got a little room to do this, talking about growing up in. I don't know if I grew up in a conservative Orthodox Christianity. We were just conservative, which just means we had our heads firmly up our rear ends.
Mm-hmm.
In regards to the rest of the world. And you'd asked me this question when we were prepping up for the show, that, what are things your folks said were from the devil that we couldn't do or watch? And so my first one, I remember this, and this is even more ridiculous, is the fact that I remember this. It was like a birthday. I got like a He-Man set. I got the full-on Castle Grayskull.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, like the drawbridge mouth,
Jealous.
all that stuff. And it had...
Yeah.
I mean, don't be too jealous, because everything, like, I remember, like, on the box looks awesome until you realize it's just, like, stickers that you're putting down.
Right.
And it's really just a huge hunk of plastic. But either way, regardless, He-Man was, like, I loved He-Man.
Don't ruin my childhood.
Sorry. I loved it and everything else. And then a few months later, my mom, I think, comes home from some sort of church prayer meeting and has apparently been told that He-Man is from the devil because, again, you've got Skeletor and He-Man, I don't know, is chanting and giving. I don't know what it was. Yeah. And so it was kind of
I have the power.
Yeah, and it wasn't like he wasn't saying Jesus was his power. So all the toys left the house.
He was fighting a giant skeleton.
Yeah, which would be evil.
Like good religious.
I don't know, but it was just I think it was the fact that he had a magic sword, and well, actually, if you think back on He-Man, for anyone out there that knows what we're talking about, I think Orko was an abomination. He was just annoying.
Yeah, he was really.
He was
annoying.
kind of like a precursor to Jar Jar,
floating like wizard-looking thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And again, that's not us being serious, but what had eventually happened because of all this fear, it ended up just like miraculously all left my house. Like, which is
overnight.
Like sad tear, my birthday present left the house because it was demonic.
Oh.
I don't know that it had a magnet.
Yeah.
For demons, whatever that means.
I think that would just, that would
So are demons metallic?
Me.
Is that what he's trying to say? Like they're some sort of...
Or they're other magnets. Because magnets can attract other magnets, right?
Yeah. I don't know. I don't know. So
I'm
Ben,
not as versed in physics to be able to finish that.
Well, that's why this show is Snarky Faith, and we're not talking about physics. So what, for you, experiences, what were things that your parents were like, no, this is bad?
Definitely Dungeons and Dragons was one that I was supposed to steer clear of. I wasn't given a ton of like rationale behind that. I think because there's like magic casting. But it's funny because my parents also, like, I rented Final Fantasy. Well, I can remember playing Dragon Warrior with my dad, and there are magic spells in that.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know. I don't know if it's because you're actually kind of part of the process and you have to like act it out versus having a controller in your hand. I don't know if that's the difference, but
Yeah.
that was a big one. And my parents, I will say my parents were pretty tame in the, they weren't like beating me over the head. You can't do this or that in terms of like culture bashing. But the one that I think really was a huge win when I actually started watching it was The Simpsons. And it was really strange because I wasn't supposed to watch it for the longest time. Even I can remember being like 13 and 14, and my dad was just so surly if he saw me watching it, and it was always this like struggle. But when I hit like 18-ish, he started watching it with me, and he just loved Homer. He would laugh. He would belly laugh at Homer because he's such a moron. So yeah, that was a really strange one for me.
No, that it is. Yeah, I remember that. I remember The Simpsons were bad. It's fun. It's funny how certain things like this, for a time, and you're on the doorstep for being a future parent. I've had a few years under my belt as a parent. There's certain things that you kind of like tighten up, and there's certain things you relax about, like rules and other stuff like that too.
Right.
And yeah, it's funny. Like that was mainly in my situation. My dad was not like he didn't pay attention to anything like in that realm. But it was my mom that would be the one that was like, would hear this in a church meeting. And like, I essentially didn't consume music until I was probably like 13 or 14, which is pretty late in the game, for that, just because of that, because, like contemporary music, unless it's like worship music or gospel music, is from the devil.
Oh yeah. Music has always been the hot battleground. I think, especially since rock's inception.
And so, yeah, that was that. I remember that being a huge no-no, which is just funny. Like, I don't know if it was, I would say, well, you can tell me if this is like hypocrisy or not with that. So my folks would be really tight on that kind of stuff. And I remember they would also, I really hope they're not listening. This is stupid. But they put me on, like, I had like a Blockbuster card. And they like signed off that I could rent anything because they didn't want to. Not for me.
Oh, so you would go fetch.
So I would go fetch it.
Movies.
So I would like ride my bike to the Blockbuster.
You're like the butler.
And pick. I essentially was for that. Which left.
That's a good idea.
Yeah, but for me, then it was like, hey, I can rent anything I want as long as I return it because they're not paying attention. Which is funny that you tighten down, you ratchet down on certain things, and other things are like meh, whatever. Which I probably saw way more than I should have at a young age. Having my Blockbuster card freedom with that versus He-Man and other stuff like that too. I don't know, but we had like it was the same thing with us, like with Dungeons and Dragons, because I had a cousin that was into it, and supposedly his house ended up burning down, and like the conservative faction of that side of the family believed, or not everyone in it, but certain people believed it was because of Dungeons and Dragons. I can
remember hearing on Focus on the Family, the like show, because we grew up near a Black Mountain radio station. I guess the Black Mountain radio station, like the Christian station, and James Dobson talked about like a child that was playing Ouija with friends, and he got like possessed by the devil and, ended up like killing one of his friends. And I can remember hearing that, and I totally believed it. And I'm like, I'm not going near this. And one of my friends down the road had a Ouija board, and he's like, hey, let's try this out. And I just like ran out of the house. I'm like, I can't be here. It definitely, I'm pretty gullible. Like I'm going to believe a lot of stuff the first time I hear it. So I don't know if that was part of the process.
No, but it is funny. Like when you think back about that kind of stuff that, I will, because you made me think of like do you remember Bloody Mary?
Oh yeah, saying it in the bathroom, looking in the mirror.
All that stuff, like I will tell you, I learned more about probably that kind of junk, about swearing, about dirty jokes, and about women. I learned way more about that. I remember every year at church summer camp.
Youth group.
At church summer camp. I would that was, we didn't need the internets back then because it was kind of like, that was the hot ground.
I didn't watch like any of the Nightmare on Elm Streets or Friday the 13th. I was pretty scared of them anyway, but I heard like the storylines of every one of them at church, like in youth group. They would discuss them every Sunday.
So it is, I don't know. I think some of that kind of stuff is really funny, that when we end up being afraid of stuff, and then we end up trying to push and like lock down our kids and make sure they're not exposed to this, that, and the other. The world's going to happen, and at least in mine, and this will be my my segment for parenting advice for future parent Ben. I think I would
need
rather
some soft music in the background.
I would rather have my kids be well prepared for engaging the world around them than hiding them and then being shocked or surprised by it, or even on the flip side of just them, because this is like human nature. You tell somebody no, and especially when you tell them no without explaining why. Well, like, I want this. Why can't I do this? What can I come and do?
So you're not too worried about Pokemon?
Oh, I'm not. I mean, mainly, that was my biggest worry is because my kids have like devices, but none of them are connected up to cellular data. And so it'll end up being, Dad, can I use your phone? Dad, can I use your phone? So that is really what I'm more worried about than them actually being possessed by the demon magnets on their phones.
The Pokemon? Do you think they, like when the demons possess someone, they sing that? Pokemon? Gotta catch all the humans.
So
gotta catch all the souls.
I know. Like, let's zoom out on all of this. Are we really Pokemons for the demons?
I think so. I think the demons are going around with Pokeballs, catching our souls.
They're trying to capture our souls,
which sounds more like Ghostbusters.
Yes,
like
but less fun. Or at least, maybe it's fun for them, less fun for us if we're or I don't even know. This is absolutely crazy.
Pokemon.
So, are you interested in Ghostbusters too? I mean, the new one. I'm sorry.
No.
Just Ghostbusters.
I know we've discussed this on previous episodes, but no.
Okay.
I'm sorry if I'm alienating people, but anything Melissa McCarthy's in, I'm just not super interested in. Her humor is so one-dimensional that I feel like once you've seen one of her movies, you've kind of got... And it's sad because I know we've talked about this before. Yes, in Gilmore Girls, she actually shows kind of some variety, and you have like a character with some depth to her. She's more charming. It's just, I don't know, when she became a comedian, it just all fell into like one category for me. And I don't know, it's just
falling down a lot.
Not interesting. Well, it's just being brash. And I get that. I think it's kind of tough. I think this is way off the reservation. I think it is tough for female comedians because I think for women in general, there are like tons of lines of expectation of what you should do and shouldn't do. And so comedy is a way of breaking down the barriers. I get that. But to me, I don't know why, but I've always been very resistant to comedy that sort of like goes way beyond the barriers with no thought put behind it. Sarah Silverman's kind of the same way to me. It's just seems like there's no kind of planning or thought put into it. It's just, let's like go way over the line of this. South Park was that way in a lot of ways to me too. It's like, let's just race as far beyond the line as we can get. And for some people it's intriguing and fun. I don't get it, and it's not my thing. So
you would say that you want more intellectual humor.
Well, I like Chris Farley, I like ridiculous slapstick, really silly stuff that doesn't take a ton of thought. It's just, I think that even in that, there's a lot of development of the character and why you should like it. Not just, I'm going to spout off as much as I can, kind of like Dennis Leary and stuff like that. It's just, let's just be brash and crass. And, I don't know, to me, there's just not a ton of difference between the people doing those things, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
It's all sort of like the same method. And it's just like the line is going further and further. Versus, some people will cross the line, but they do it in a very intelligent way. Like Chris Rock was doing that. And he's in kind of a line of black comedians that are sort of pushing the, Richard Pryor was, let's go over this line, but I mean, it's for a point. It's, we're not supposed to talk about this stuff about how black people are treated. So I'm going to talk about it. And if it were in that vein, I think I would like it a little bit more, but I don't know. Maybe I'm thinking too much about it, and maybe part of it too is that a lot of people like her right now, and that's an automatic turnoff for me sometimes.
Well, I like what you just did with that, Ben, because usually what we do is I have the hardest time trying to figure out segues when we're going from like point A to point B. But I love how you talked about Richard Pryor pushing a point, especially about how like African Americans are treated in the country, and again. We've hit this really weird spot in the history of our country, and I've been asking, actually going around asking folks that are a bunch older than I am. I'm kind of saying like, is this like, is this my perception that things are feeling a lot crazier than normal, versus, I don't know, because I mean, again, if we're talking about the, like, I've been around so many church people my whole life where it's kind of like everyone's like, this is the end times, Jesus is coming again soon.
The signs, it's the
signs.
signs.
But if you keep doing that year after year, it kind of like loses. You know what I mean? Like, oh, it's, the end times are about here.
Mm-hmm.
Like, you can't keep saying that for, I've heard that my entire life. And the funny thing is, I've heard it from like the same people.
Mm-hmm.
So it's kind of like, I mean, it's a really bad prediction if like if you keep going, I don't know.
It's like you keep missing the prediction. It's like, well, I was a little bit off, but this is it for sure. This time.
But now it is, but no.
Because of Pokemon.
But when I look at this, and I've actually been trying to ask folks that, is this simply just due to my age and not noticing stuff before in life, or because I mean, when you're like, well, not everybody, but like when you're like 15 and 16, you're not really paying that much attention to politics, like on a deeper level.
Yeah.
You're not paying attention to world affairs or any of that kind of stuff. And so I didn't know if it's just that, based upon the age I'm at, like the, having kids of a certain age and all that other kind of stuff, like, am I just noticing this for the first time, or has things kind of like ramped up and has the crazy kind of gone off the charts a little bit, especially in our country? And when I was on my way over here, I was noticing too that there was like, again with what happened in France, the flags are flying at half mast, and at least over the last 3 weeks, I feel like there has been no reason to not. I mean, I'm double negating it up off the board, but there's really not a reason to not be flying flags at half mast, because there's just been event after event after event after event. Mm-hmm. And so I know I've been talking to folks that are I've 60s and like 70s, really trying to ask this question, like, is every like season, or every kind of like, is it always this crazy and I'm just noticing it now? And they said no, because I keep hearing the same answer, that this feels like the 60s, like the civil rights movement time, where there's a lot of pushing and pushing back, and there's a lot of just deplorable things that are happening, and then people so at least that's what I'm hearing. I don't know that that's completely true or not, or if I'm just getting limited perspectives on it, but it does feel like things have been a lot crazier lately.
Yeah, I actually heard an older person say the other day, I didn't realize what was going on with the like live broadcasted bleeding to death of
like Facebook Live and Periscope.
Castile, and then like right after that, I think that the day after the shooting of the policemen or the police officers, and someone saw that on the news while I was working with them in their room, and said, we're headed to civil war. And I didn't realize what was going on, but just coming home and kind of learning what was going on, I was like, wow, this is getting pretty wild. I think another big difference, I was actually thinking about civil rights movement as well, but I mean, now you've got, I think at that point, media was much more controlled and sort of channeled through very specific things. And now media is all over the place. And you really can see a new thing every single day. Yeah. Depending on who's shooting the camera, and like where they are. And then you've got stuff going on overseas. So we're seeing different countries. It just feels like news is coming at you constantly, like refreshing another story of something and something. So I feel like in that way, it's different, maybe a little bit more intense. But I didn't live in the 60s, and I know that was pretty wild as well. At least the feeling, like the vibes of it, because I think a lot of people felt more empowered at that point. They started to feel like they could do more. So I don't know if it's like a mix between that and technology at this point.
Well, and I was talking with some other, and this is what's been interesting too. And you end up seeing this, and I think a lot of this came out of probably white Christians. The whole like all lives matter. Yeah. Which is fairly tone deaf. Well, I think
I wouldn't even say like Christians. I think it's kind of a generational thing of people. There's just a generation that feels, like whatever niche thing I'm a part of is important, because identity is such a like huge thing now that it's like, well, this matters and this matters. And So anyway, I'm sorry, you keep on with your train of thought.
No, but you're right about that. But on the flip side too, like for all this stuff, hashtag stuff to have been coming out, we also know it can. I mean, I guess what I'm trying to say is it. There's no way that it started from an older person. Do you know what I'm
no.
saying?
Yeah.
I mean, there's very few people that I would know that are retired and like just killing it on Twitter.
Right.
I mean, there probably are like a handful, like 2.
I feel like
but
that's like the silent generation that's kind of right up at the cusp of we're getting ready to switch and they're not going to be around anymore.
yeah,
That sort of like World War II generation. And yeah, I feel like because they
or even
are
the boomers too.
Well, I think the boomers might have embraced.
I'm not
technology.
trying to say they're about to die. I'm trying to say they're not on Twitter.
Yeah, they
much.
probably aren't. I feel like they might be a little more inclined to do that kind of stuff.
Sure.
Because they're not quite as weirded out by technology. And again, this isn't everyone, I think, but there are sort of like trends that happen. But I mean, in the silent generation, I feel like it is kind of a trend, like a cohort effect, that you just don't really like talk as much as younger generations do about yourself and feel the need to be, recognized for everything you do and every thought you have. So anyway,
no,
I'm just ruminating. I feel like I've had too much coffee today.
Is there such a thing?
No,
I would say that. I mean, or I will get to that point where I drink so much coffee I start feeling sick. That's probably when there's too much. But I have not hit that. I've not gone over that crest yet. But when we begin to look at this, I was having a conversation with some, because I do discussion groups like around the area here, and it was good. It was a really good conversation to where one person really wasn't understanding the distinction between Black Lives Matter and All Lives Matter.
Mm-hmm.
That it really has to do with context and with the situation that's going on. I mean, I think that overall they were having a hard time seeing that the idea of Black Lives Matter isn't simply just saying Black Lives Matter and everybody, just screw all the rest of y'all type of situation at all. But it's simply about, it's kind of a situation to where if we say like all lives matter, if we do this like on a math chart, so let's just assume that, everything's like at a 0. So all lives matter, that's a baseline for us. And I feel like a lot of the African American community feel that they're probably like a negative 50 beyond that.
Yeah.
So I think that protesting and being able to bring stuff into the consciousness and into the conversation and into advocacy hopefully brings them closer to sea level, whereas the rest of us just assume, well, of course, like that's just how life is. And so, and it was a good conversation I had because the other person hadn't thought of it from that direction. They just assumed that they were trying to say, well, if Black Lives Matter, that means they matter more than others, which is, I think, that the kind of tone-deaf nature that the whole all lives matter response. I mean, because I wouldn't say it's necessarily a movement. I don't think there's great groups of people out there that are protesting and doing the other kind of stuff. Because for the most part, I don't call social media like that. I don't call that real advocacy.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? Like if I can sit on my butt and type some stuff out and send it out into the Twitterverse or into Facebook Landtopia or whatever that is, and it was required very little of me.
Yeah.
But I think that when I'm actually putting my feet on the ground, when I'm actually doing stuff out with people, that kind of advocacy, and I'm not saying people voicing opinions doesn't create change, but I think it can't simply just be that.
It can disavow you from doing things.
Yeah.
I think that's the big danger in just talking, is that it feels good to express yourself, but then you can sort of relieve all of your pent up sort of energy towards something and just saying something about it. And then that's always to me been the greatest danger of, not protesting, I think does have its place. I think it's kind of an important like cultural piece in the United States. But then, things like campaigning or just like posting stuff on Facebook. But to get back to the All Lives Matter versus Black Lives Matter, just kind of a different way of saying that. I feel like Black Lives Matter, it responded to something very specific.
Yeah.
It's coming out of something that's happening that's very grounded in a problem, versus All Lives Matter or whatever spinoff came from that was more of it. You said like a response to or a reaction to Black Lives Matter.
Yeah.
And it almost like usurps it and sort of waters it down to saying, then it becomes about something different. Whereas Black Lives Matter, I don't think people were, like you were saying, I don't think they were trying to say that Black Lives Matter more. They were trying to say, okay, so this is going on. You have like institutional racism and this, and this, and we want to say that that's wrong. And I mean, like white people were, I think, kind of jumping on board with Black Lives Matter.
Yeah.
So I think that even is a signal that people are not trying to say that, Black Lives Matter more than white lives or something like that. Because I think that's where a lot of the pushback comes, is that people feel threatened, that just because someone's standing up for themselves, that it somehow like tears them down or their identity down.
Mm-hmm.
But I mean, to me at least, it was just like, hey, let's all point at this and say that this is wrong. Like, this is a problem.
Yeah.
But then to say, well, all lives matter, or like this group matters, then you just get a total watering down, and people, you lose that sort of power of paying attention to a specific thing or a specific problem.
Well, I mean, with that, I mean, because even that's especially after the shooting of the policeman, recently. Sorry, police people. What is the correct?
Yeah, I know. That's what I kind of call
police
myself
officers,
in that too. Police officers, yeah.
With that then people are doing like the Blue Lives Matter and all this other kind of stuff, and I think that when we get so hung up in the specifics, of that, I think that what it does is it ends up blinding us to the problem that started the whole conversation.
Right.
And I think that when we begin to see that, I mean, it's gotten to the point in this country in many ways. It feels like that. I don't know. I mean, that like a lot of like, especially like with institutional racism. But you begin to look at the situation to where it feels like a lot of African Americans are kind of guilty until proven innocent.
Mm-hmm.
As opposed to innocent until proven guilty. You know what I mean? Like
it's starting from a really tough position. It's like not starting from the same starting point as other people.
Yeah.
And that's what you're like already behind the 8 ball before you're making like, decisions and judgments and things.
Well, I mean, on top of it is, or because I can't imagine this. Like, I really can't. Like, I mean, there's probably been times in my life where I felt little ounces, like tiny little drops of some of the stuff, but I can't imagine fearing for my life.
Yeah.
When I see a cop car or if I get pulled over, like just having it run through my head, I might die right now.
Right.
Like I've not been in a situation like that really ever. And so, so for me it's hard to contextualize, but I can say, and I think that like, connecting this with faith, which I think the church in many ways, I mean, I think there are pockets out there that are doing things that are wonderful and great to be able to step in, and help our different sisters and brothers like across the country that are hurting, that are being oppressed, that are doing all of this. But I think by and large, what ends up happening is we end up just saying that I feel like we give very cheap answers as a people of faith for very complex, very very tough problems.
Yeah.
Or what we'll do is we'll have like, because I've seen this, like you do this at the beginning of like a church service. Or something like that. Let's have a moment of silence. Let's pray for those who were shot in Orlando or who were shot in Dallas or who were shot, here. I mean, we kind of have that, but then we move on.
Right.
So it ends up
we
being,
did our duty.
Well, it is. It ends up making me feel kind of like, the whole idea, especially in the Catholic Church, of like confession. Like as long as I go and say it, it's off. Like, oh, I feel so much better. I just don't have to worry about this anymore.
Right.
You just kind of are like tearing a Band-Aid off. Well, let's just get this over with, and then we can move back to our everyday lives. And I think that when we begin to look deeper into the faith and we begin to look deeper into like what kind of lives or what kind of like ethics or what kind of way that Jesus has called us to live from, I don't think we can absolve our responsibility in issues like that with a simple prayer and walking away afterwards. Or feeling sad.
Because Jesus saw problems and he looked at them and then just prayed.
Yeah, and then was like,
and then he went on. Okay,
keep moving on.
That's good.
I mean, because it is. I mean, we've talked about that. I mean, that ends up being one of like the most. I mean, that's kind of one of those cheap Christian responses and stuff. Oh yeah, let me pray for you.
Yeah.
Like, and that's that's even on a personal level. And I think I think we've trained ourselves to use these words that we really don't know what we mean. Because I do think that, I mean, we'll go ahead and tell you guys, which we probably should have told you at the beginning of this episode. This is probably going to be a two-parter. Not probably, this is going to be a two-parter because I feel like this conversation ends up being, there's a lot more to unpack, in the midst of this. Because I think we want to talk to like the idea of prayer versus action, and how in many ways, and I guess we're going to kind of crisscross and weave our way through a lot of this kind of stuff. But I think that what we're called to do, I think that we're called to something more than praying. And again, I know some people will get mad and say, you don't understand. There's power in prayer. I'm not saying that. But what I am saying is that, there comes a time, I think that, we can pray all we want, but I think God also calls us to make change happen in the world too. Because I think you can get into a mindset where prayer almost in a certain sense leads to inaction.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think it's something that we can do because there's many problems within American Christianity, and I think one of them is that whole nature of just my own personal Jesus kind of an idea, that somehow like I can just, I'm in my room alone, me and Jesus, that's all I need type of a situation, and that somehow that our faith should force us, I think, to engage the world around us, not hide from it, which, hey, connecting at the very beginning of our show. I didn't think about that. But, we were talking about how...
Pokemon?
Yes, but like where our folks would have this idea that somehow we needed to hide from the world. That religion equaled hiding from the world for us to be able to stay pure and holy. But I think that you see that exactly the opposite in the way of Jesus, where actually he calls us to move into the world, to move into those areas that are dark, or those areas that are rough, or those areas that are messy, to be able to offer hope and healing in a place, and not simply just with words, but with actions as well too.
And to me, there's different instances of prayer in Scripture, and to sort of universally say like prayer is this or that, I think that's not nuanced enough. But you very, very often you see prayer sort of connected with people that are in situations where they've tried and tried and tried, and they've like pushed, and now all they can do is like beg for some sort of change, something else to happen. And I don't really see a lot of this sort of, let's just like take 5 minutes in Sunday service to pray about this, or even, I'm going to take like a minute or two to pray about this right now. It's like, what's that connected to? Is it connected to you having heard something and you're like emotionally stirred, and so that's how you kind of act? That's what you like plug into to be able to invest your energy or your emotion in that? Or have you actually been doing stuff and you've been trying and getting really frustrated that, you've been pouring into something and trying to fix it and it's not helping? And so, that's like a different situation. And to me, that represents more of what you see in Scripture. And I think Christians have become disconnected and like you were describing in church services in the United States, where it really is sort of a let's come together. It's almost an investment in feeling good that you like came together and recognized that it's a problem, but you did it within four walls, and hopefully maybe every once in a while I do think people get stirred and they're like, okay, I'm going to do something about this, and they go to law school and they actually go and fight for this problem. But I think for the most part, people, that investment of emotion in that moment of prayer, that's enough for them, and then they feel good. It sort of relieves. It's like a relief. And I just that's not at all what Scripture is really describing in prayer. It's more of a, it's a signal that there will be no relief until something happens,
Yeah.
So it almost doesn't make sense to me that that's what prayer has become, or that's what prayer is. It should, that you're praying about a problem means that problem's probably going to be there tomorrow, and that you're still going to be trying to fix it. You know what I mean?
Oh, you're right. What it makes me think of, and so I know, Ben, that you will allow me to take a small rabbit trail on this, because we've never done this before on the show. No, but
Pokemon? I'll quit doing that, I promise.
Actually makes me laugh every time, so it's fine. But when you look at this, I think it stands back. Let's take a step back, because we're talking about, and we do this quite often on the show, the idea that American Christianity is flawed in many ways. And I think that some of this comes from the fact of even how we view church. When we do this, we need to go to a place where we can worship God or learn about God, and then we leave that place and go back to our life. Where it ends up being somehow this religious space is a destination that we go to, and then there's the rest of life. And like in a certain sense, there's the afterlife. That is where God lives, but we live down here. And we do this. There's this separation of things.
Mm-hmm. It's an escape.
Yes,
it's like watching a movie or something.
And so when I was even watching, they had some services that for racial reconciliation in Dallas after like the police shootings. You begin to see this, and you'll see, and again, we have lots of press watching this. We have lots of people turning out for this, and you'll have black folks and white folks. We're all worshiping, singing songs together, and they'll say, "Look at this. We have become reconciled.
Mm-hmm.
This is where the healing begins." But my problem with that is, I'll just go ahead and say this. I think those kind of things I think they're fluff, and they don't accomplish anything. And here's why I say that. I say they don't accomplish anything because what typically happens is you have your Sunday, but then there's a Monday morning. That we've done this, and we've crossed these lines, and we've gotten our photo taken, and all this. Regardless, even if it's on a smaller scale, like with this idea of racial reconciliation. But what happens is, it may change for a moment, like what our religious lives look like. Like we're worshiping with people that have different skin color. But what tends to happen is it doesn't actually change how we live the rest of our lives.
Mm-hmm.
Meaning that, does that mean now that I am going to go out of my way to spend now time with these people so that I'm like my regular rhythms of life are now with them? Are we breaking bread with them on a regular basis? Am I hearing their stories? Have they become part of my family? Have they become part of my tribe? Do you know what I'm saying? Like for reconciliation to happen, it can't be an event. Like it just becomes a rhythm of life.
Yeah, and part of that too, I think, is did it stem from something that happened before you came into the church? Like, were you connected with it before you came in, and someone told you, okay, or I mean, I'm not even talking about hearing something on the news and it upsets you.
Yeah.
I mean, is this something that's been, that you've experienced as something as part of your life? So to me, the key word is like significance. Is it significant? Is it relevant to you? And then I don't know. It connects you to it in a different way, I think.
Yeah. Well, I mean, because you can see stuff like, okay, we have stuff that happens where folks get shot, where we see stuff happen like in Paris, where a ton of people get killed. We see that and we're saddened, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so we feel something. We have like a tiny ounce of like empathy when we begin to see that. But I can tell you there's a difference between saying this is wrong and feeling bad about it, in that kind of scenario. But then going back to the rest of life, like if I know this for people in my life, like if something like happens to my kids, like I've been in situations where they've gotten injured or hurt, like it's almost as if I got injured or hurt too.
Right.
Like I'm so invested with them. Like when they bleed, I bleed. When they hurt, I hurt. And I think that I don't think that happens. When we're talking about like at least how we've kind of Americanized or publicized or whitewashed this whole idea of reconciliation, how we do this. I mean, we feel outrage almost in an intellectual sense, but we don't almost feel the outrage in a deeper soul sense.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that when that outrage is in a deeper soul sense for us, I think it moves us to action.
And I was actually thinking of this morning, kind of in response to what's going on right now, the difference between like why has Dr. King's legacy like changed the way that we talk about race or think about race? And it has. I mean, it's had a really big significance on sort of our national consciousness. And I know that some people would say it's probably not enough, but he did have a huge impact. And I think a huge part of that is his life. It was, I mean, yeah, the man was a genius. I think that's part of it. He was just extremely intelligent, and the way that he did things and thought about his sort of trajectory of action was really well thought out, well planned. But he also lived it. I mean, it was part of it was like actually being with people. It stemmed from a life of seeing certain things that were wrong, and he connected all of these different pieces, and it had to do with his life. He was like marching with people, he was living with people, seeing what people were actually going through on ground level, in their like businesses and in their everyday lives, the streets they were walking, public transportation, just the things that make up life. And he was there, he was living it with them. And that's just, to me, that's so different than, I'm gonna like come from my life to this building,
Yeah.
and we're just gonna like address this for a little while and feel. We're gonna get the feels for a little bit,
Or
and then we're
like,
going home.
and I'll let you riff on this one. Or like when the Senate has like a sit-in
Oh gosh.
and they're trying to liken
And
it.
orders donuts.
And donuts would be great. They also had catered dinners
Yeah.
and bathrooms. I mean,
Right.
when I begin to to hear like what a sit-in is, like it has to cost you something.
Yeah.
Besides, like, this is a little bit of an inconvenience. I'm in the air conditioning and I'm eating my catered food, and this is wonderful. That kind of, because I feel like when you begin to talk about Dr. King with this, I mean, on some level, you have to own your cause, but then at a certain time, I think the cause starts to own a piece of you.
Oh, absolutely.
You know,
it
and-
costs something. I mean, when you
Yeah.
when you have a rock thrown at your head, for doing a sit-in, that's very different than let's get all the cameras over here and point them at us as we sit on our own floor and have catered dinners. I mean, that actually sounds kind of fun. That sounds like a church, like what is it?
It's a lock-in.
Lock-in.
Yeah.
Yeah, there you go. Let's like play crazy volleyball in blacklight strobe lights.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Except for when the Senate does it, you don't worry about if they're getting handsy with one another.
Yeah. You don't need quite as many chaperones.
No, you don't. Well, I mean, maybe.
You probably
do.
do.
No, but I think that, like, again, I mean, think of this. So when we begin to talk about advocacy and change, I mean, like, the names that would hop in my head would be like Jesus, like Gandhi, like Martin Luther King. I mean, you begin to see people that owned it on such a deep level and had such a deep conviction. And I feel like that, and again, this isn't like railing against social media, but it is at the same time. I think that it gets tied in with our need for immediacy. With our need for, like, I want to feel this right now. Like,
Mhm.
I want to spout out about this right now.
Right.
But like the way we consume information and technology, or go looking for Poke Gems.
Can I do it?
Yeah.
Pokemon.
But like, I feel like that feeds our need for immediacy, and the way that works is, I feel like in a certain sense, like, technology kind of lends itself to make us all ADD a little bit,
Mm-hmm.
to where it's like, what's this squirrel, type of a thing, and I think that, and we get it through our news. How do we consume our news? Why we consume it in the fact that it's just constantly, it's just a constant stream, a constant flow. And it's almost like we can't even let our brains invest deeply in something,
Mm-hmm.
and until we're on to the next thing.
Right.
And I think that some of this stems, and it's not. I mean, I think this is a cultural problem, and then on the second tier of that, I would say B, it's also a church problem with that. Is I feel like that we don't invest deeply in much anymore. I think that we spread around, and this is, I'll talk about this. I mean, like, just from a church thing, I think that. Think of it like this: like, if we're talking about things like missions or outreach or whatever that is, I think the what churches like is they like to be able to have bragging rights. Oh, we're feeding the homeless. Oh, we're doing this in Uganda. Oh, we're doing this over here.
Mm-hmm.
But one of the things that happens is if you don't invest deeply in any of them, you're just investing poorly in all of them.
Yeah.
And I think that the way, especially when we talk about faith, and even action with that, I think one of, like, the great sins of the church is that we don't invest deeply in things. I think that we don't invest deeply in what is screaming and crying out at us outside the walls of the church.
Right.
And
you're speaking very specifically outside of the walls of my church.
Yeah, no, literally,
Like my
yes.
neighborhood.
Absolutely, absolutely. No, that's good. That's good clarity. Not because I again think, and we've said this on the show before, but it's something that, I mean, it's something that continues to come back to me, and I think that for folks, and I think there's a travesty that begins to happen because we don't ask ourselves this, and this is something that I don't think that we teach people that say that they follow Jesus to really have eyes like Jesus had,
Mm-hmm.
to be able to look at the world in a way, to where we say, these are the places where Jesus would go, like in my community, like outside the walls of the church, like, where are the hurting and the broken? Where are those people? How can we go there and not simply just say, here's a sandwich because you're hungry, right?
Mm-hmm.
Again, you're band-aiding a deeper problem.
Right.
But we do it because it can be a good photo op, like we were saying about how Congress does. It's a good photo op. I mean, but unless we're investing deeper in these lives of these people, all we're doing is giving them a sandwich, and guess what? They're going to be hungry in a few hours again. Like, we didn't fix that.
And I think another question that pops up with this whole, we're kind of talking some about like altruism or service and those sorts of things that the church kind of does, but does halfway. That I don't think we often ask like, who is benefiting from this? And that's something in reading more Nietzsche I really appreciate. I think that's almost his like starting point for a lot of his conversations. It's to like, let's get down to the deepest level of like, who is the person that's doing this, and are they benefiting from it, and are they doing it kind of out of like self-interest? And I think in our world, especially in the West, that like drives so much that people are really doing things in self-interest. Usually it's cloaked in so much other stuff that it's hard to like get down to. Some people even just assume that everyone acts out of self-interest. I feel like one of the things that makes Jesus so different, and when you were talking about like what is Jesus doing and how can we live like him, I think that kind of at its base is he's trying to not do that. He's trying to not act out of self-interest. That's the point of service, and that whole, in Philippians, he poured himself out. I think that's part of it. It's like, let's ask, where's our starting point? And am I doing this out of my interest, like interest in me, or am I actually trying to like benefit someone else in doing this? I don't know if we ask that question a lot, because when we do go on like mission trips and things like that and try to serve other people, it's not that we're not doing good things. It's not that building something for someone is not a great thing to do, or I don't know what all goes on in all mission trips. A lot of times it has to do with like handing out food, like you were saying. It's not that those things aren't good, but a lot of times I think we do that for a week and we feel great for the year, and that's kind of what we plug into constantly is this. I'm helping people, and I know that I should be doing that. But then you're disavowing the rest of, the year. Like, where's the help the rest of the year for the people that you walk by on the street every day? So I think if you sort of like tally the cost and risk and all that it's a very small investment, and it's really in your self-interest. Part of that probably also comes from the fact that I watched The Big Short yesterday.
And it's a good movie.
Really sad to me. I love there's a moment at which I don't want to ruin too much of it. This is kind of the beginning, like middle of the movie, so it doesn't give away too much. But Brad Pitt's character is this like banker that is no longer wanting to be a banker, and they're like celebrating something that they've done with him, and they've like had some, they got some gains from money, and he's really upset, and they're like, what's the matter with you? We just gained money. And he basically says, maybe this is a spoiler, but he says, but at what cost? We have just cost like so many people jobs, houses, just kind of everyday people, probably like the poorest of the poor are the ones who suffer the most off of what we just gained. So like tone it down a bit. And I don't know. I think that's what it's like. I don't think we really think that in depth about what we're doing. And there's just sort of this under the surface, there's always this like self-interest that we're feeding, that if we would just stop, and maybe it's naive of me to think that, we could quell that, but I feel like God is offering us something different in the life of Jesus, that he was trying to not serve himself. He was trying to serve other people.
Well, and just for you guys to know, also, we're gonna cut this talk a little short because we are going to roll this one into next week, because I think it's an interesting, evolving conversation that we have here. I want to kind of keep digging a little bit deeper on as we move through it. But I think that what you're also saying, Ben, is that I think that, well, the way I'm looking at this as, for long-term change to happen, what I think fights it, especially in the church, what the pushback from it is ultimately it's not very sexy to stay in a place, like, and put roots down and be there. You know what I'm saying? Like, it's not it's not good PR. It's not something like, look at what we've done. We are still there doing the same thing and doing life. You know what I mean? Like, well, where else have you gone? What else are you doing? Stop talking about that. No, but because it's not sexy to stay.
Yeah.
And I think that's it, whether it's a movement, whether it is advocacy, whether it's in that, I think the whole thing is it's about investment and staying and seeing it through to a point where you don't matter anymore, you know?
Right.
So I don't know. So let's put a pause on this one real quick. And just a reminder, as we finished this broadcast, that you can always catch us on podcasts at www.snarkyfaith.com. Hop on. Hey, if you like this show, and you should, right? Go over on iTunes and give us a review. Throw up 5 stars. 5 is better than 4. And with it, you can find us on Facebook, Twitter. You can email us off the website. Just remember, we love to hear your feedback. We love to hear what you're going through and what you want us to talk about next. But that is all we have this week, and we will be back continuing this conversation next week. We're out of here.
WCOM is listener-supported community radio, and Snarky Faith is only possible through our sponsors. Aqueduct Conference Centre was established in 1978 as a peaceful destination for small group meetings, special events, conferences, retreats, and weddings. For more information, go to www.aqueductcc.com. We are also sponsored by Lumen. Lumen, a spiritual community of seekers, sojourners, question askers, doubters, and skeptics, is a collective of fellow travelers that embrace the truth that all life is sacred, hope is real, and tomorrow can be better than today. All are welcome. You can find more information at www.lumencommunities.com.